I found myself absolutely captivated by a documentary on Netflix the other night. It is called Chef's Table, and it highlights the work of some world-famous chefs. The episode that caught my particular attention was that of Massimo Bottura in Modena. It begins with a compelling montage of images of the earthquakes in northern Italy in 2012. It was a surprising beginning for a show that I thought was going to be a cooking show, and so I took notice. The camera panned to wheels and wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano cheese that had toppled off of the shelves as a result of the earthquake. Now, I never knew exactly how much a wheel of Parm can weigh. Many were over 80 pounds. That is an 11-year-old for reference. And there they were, lying askew on the ground. Some of them were broken, some were simply damaged. And the documentary went on to say that without a collective effort of the local industry to safeguard the authentic trademark of Parmigiano Reggiano, the industry could be threatened. Of course, Parmigiano Reggiano can only be produced in Parma, Reggio Emilia, Modena, Bologna, and Mantua. I didn't know all of that. This cheese is a cornerstone of the regional economy, with an annual turnover in the neighborhood of 1.2 billion euros. In the aftermath of the quake, more than 600 family farms and 37 dairies had been affected. 600,000 cheeses fell, of which 120,000 had to be destroyed or melted. Damages totaled some 100 million euros. It was a natural disaster that could have ruined an entire industry. Naturally, I was intrigued, and so I wanted to learn more, and I found myself reading up on cheese standards, a topic I never thought I would be researching. And what I learned is that if the cheese was intact, it could continue to be aged through its normal cycle and then wear the prized brand of Parmigiano Reggiano. But if the wheel had cracked inside, or if the rind was broken, it could only be sold as unaged hard cheese. No matter how good it smelled, no matter how high the quality might be. So recognizing the threat of this, Massimo developed a recipe, lightning quick, using an old favorite, cacio e pepe, a delicious comfort food of pasta with cheese and pepper, but he put a few twists into it. First, he made the dish a risotto, which is the staple grain of that region. And then, of course, naturally, he substituted the regular run-of-the-mill hard Roman cheese with Parmigiano Reggiano. But then, using the marvels of social media and other methods, he and others began to organize the largest national sit-down dinner ever. And you might well imagine what happens next. The meal of the night was this risotto made with the damaged Parmigiano Reggiano. NPR and other media outlets picked up the story. The end result was a resounding success. Not one local cheesemaker went out of business following the earthquakes. Massimo called it social justice on a global scale done with food. Don't you just love the creativity and heart that such stories show us? I mean, isn't it just amazing what humankind is capable of when we live and love and work in ways that are intended to be redemptive. When I think of the transfiguration of Jesus, I imagine that my first reaction is much the same as most of yours, and that all of us have a reaction very similar to that of the handful of disciples that Jesus allowed to see him alongside Moses and Elijah. And that reaction is this, namely, this is not normal. Nothing about this interaction seems to point us toward any humanity in God. If anything, this story seems poised to point us toward the otherworldly, the deeply different, utterly transcendent quality of God that cannot be grasped by human understanding. A very common interpretation of this text, you may have heard it through the years, is that there are mountaintop experiences and there are valley experiences. And while we worship on the mountaintop and are simultaneously moved and transfixed, life nonetheless occurs in the valley. And so by definition, healing must occur in the valley. And friends, these are all very good and well and true things to say. Life does have moments of extraordinary beauty, bordering even on transcendence. And life does have moments where healing is desperately needed, and God is present in both of them, to be sure, but that is not the point of this text. The point of this text, in this moment in Luke, is to prefigure the death of Jesus. Listen to what one New Testament scholar writes about this text. The only actor in this event is God. The God who could rescue the Son from suffering confirms for Jesus the way of the cross. This God also tells the disciples, who will soon face conditions that seem to derail, if not bring to an end, their hope in Jesus, that those very painful conditions do not lie across the way, but rather on the way to the completion of God's purpose. This is a mountaintop experience, but not the kind about which persons write glowingly of sunrises, soft breezes, warm friends, music, and quiet time. On this mountain, the subject is death. And the frightening presence of God reduces those present to silence. In due time, after the resurrection, they will remember and understand and not feel heavy. In fact, they will tell it broadly as good news. But in this moment, this is a harbinger of the suffering of Christ and his death on the cross. This is a watershed moment. You know those moments that bring everything into clarity and distill what is most important in our lives. As hard as it can be to hear, this moment stands as an affirmation of the way of the cross. It is an affirmation of the humanity of God. It is also an affirmation of the divinity of Christ. It is an affirmation of the self-sacrificing love that changes the world. It is also a moment when the greatness of God is seen in the humanity of Jesus. Let me tell you about a theological pet peeve of mine. You will hear it often through the years. You may have even already heard it from me. It is this: I detest it when people excuse moral failures with the self-deprecating observation, "I'm only human." There is nothing only about being human. Moral failures do not come as the result of the fullness of our humanity, but rather in the moments that we fail to live up to the fullness of our humanity, when we fail to live up to that which God has created us to be. Wrong acts may occasionally describe what humans are up to, but they never define what it means to be human. Indeed, to be human is to be called into that life of self-sacrifice that is shown to us in Jesus Christ. Now, before I go too far down this road, I need to acknowledge that there is a tremendous debate in scholarly communities about what exactly does it mean to be fully human. And I understand this, and I wouldn't want to misrepresent it to you. As luminous of theologians as Karl Barth and John Calvin in their respective centuries disagreed about the capacity of humankind to show the imprint of the divine in our being. Now, this is a gross simplification, but Barth felt that the imprint of God in creation is so shattered by sin that no conclusions about the nature of God are even remotely possible based upon the behavior of humankind. Even in our best moments, we cannot show what it means to be imprinted with the image of God, according to Barth. Calvin, however, writing centuries before, and I might add under no less gloomy circumstances, was not nearly so sure about this. Calvin believed in his best moments that perhaps we can show something of the imprint of the divine in our lives. They disagree about what it means to be human, but they don't disagree about this. Jesus reveals to us not only God, but also the fullness of what it means to live an authentically human life. At this moment of transfiguration on the mountaintop, it is also a moment of epiphany, because while Moses and Elijah are there, they do not show what it means to be in the image of God. That alone is reserved for Jesus, who represents the totality of who God is. Now, I understand that it is not just impracticable, but impossible to suggest that in human life, in the emulation of Jesus, we will capture the revelation of God as shown in the Transfiguration. I get all of that. That's frankly above our ability. But it is not impossible to see the fullness of humanity in Jesus Christ. And no more clearly do we see this than when Jesus' first action after coming down the mountain, his first action as he continues on the road that will surely lead him to Jerusalem and to his death on a cross, his first action is to re-engage with the healing of the world. He does so by healing the boy seized in convulsions under the control of a demon. So, friends, while theologians may not be able to agree about the image of God on humankind, we know exactly what humanity looks like in its fullest expression. The full expression of what it means to be human is what we see in the life of Jesus Christ. Let me ask you a question for this Lent. Have you ever read one of the Gospels from cover to cover? I know we've all read them piecemeal because that is how the lectionary dishes them up for us, but have you ever read one from cover to cover, start to finish? The longest one is Luke's Gospel narrative. It is just 34 pages in the Bible that is in the rack on the pew in front of you. The shortest, by the way, is Mark. It is only 20 pages. You can read Mark by reading 3 pages a day for a week and you'll be done. Now, I understand that in the gospel there are some passages that are hard to understand and some that need interpretation. I get all of that. But what I also know is that if you will simply read the story and keep reading, even when you encounter a hard patch, you will see some very clear themes emerge, no matter which gospel narrative you pick for your reading assignment. Here is what you will see from Jesus. If you take me up on the challenge to sometime over the course of the next few weeks, read a gospel narrative from cover to cover, you will see compassion for those who are suffering and anger at those who are causing it. You will also see unconditional love for both. You know, that's a great baseline for life as we seek to live into the fullness of our humanity, to be compassionate to those who need it and to work against those who cause suffering and to love everyone regardless. That is what builds a common life together for a congregation. That is also what works for the healing of the world. And perhaps most to the point, it is what we are called to do. Every single one of us, to live into the fullness of our humanity, to have compassion for those who are suffering, and to work against the efforts of those who cause suffering, and to love everyone regardless. So let's go back to Massimo's story. As he was talking in this documentary about the restaurant that he owns in Modena, he shared the story of a woman named Lydia. Lydia is an elderly woman with failing eyesight who came to him one day seeking a job. She applied for a position in the kitchen, and as he interviewed her and looked over her resume, she kept saying to him over and over again, "I am blind, my eyes are no good, but I can still make pasta." And finally, Massimo said to her, "Well, stop telling me what you can't do and show me what you can." And he says that she went over to the workbench and mounded up her flour and made a well in the middle of it and cracked her eggs into the well and began pulling the flour into the dough until she finished. And then carefully she rolled it out and by feel cut beautiful strips of pappardelle. The job was hers. After a few months, though, one day she pulled the preeminent chef aside and said she needed to tell him something. She said, "You're doing it wrong. First thing, always, before you begin the dinner service, first thing, before the first bit of work for the evening is to be done, you need to bring everyone, the cooks, the waiters, the dishwashers, and the chefs. You need to bring them all together and feed them a proper meal." Friends, every single one of us is called to work for the healing of the world by expressing compassion for those who need compassion and actively working against those who cause suffering, and to love everyone as we go. We are called, every single one of us, to this life. And I say this gently but truthfully, no one else can live your calling for you. You alone can live into the fullness of your humanity, embracing that which God has called you to do. to show compassion for those who need compassion, to work actively against those who cause suffering, and to love everyone regardless. And because this can be a rather large challenge, we are called, every one of us, to come and have a proper meal to sustain us along the way. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, amen.